which you know, and I'm here with
Philip Scott. I'm the CTF CTS Consultant for Edmonton Catholic, which gives me a large range of options to work with teachers, really and figuratively.
Yeah, yes. Literally. So, I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask, not just what is difficult about teaching junior high CTF, but even just the concept of junior high CTF, because from what I understand, it's literally everything.
So, CTF in junior high covers, it's extremely undefined in how it covers things, but basically it's kind of the options that aren't the fine arts, second languages, that sort of stuff. So it can be, we can have crossovers though, because we can do comm tech, which is graphic design, and we have students creating items. We have foods, we have shop, we have design studies, we have a lot of other areas, and there's areas in phys ed and outdoor. So it's a lot, which is good and bad.
I mean, good because we know we want kids to have like fully rounded education, but difficult when it comes to pinning down strategy or anything.
Yeah, and CTF has 14 outcomes. That's it for everything.
I didn't know that.
The idea of the CTF was to allow junior highs to go with what their teachers know and what their students want, and it didn't want to tie teachers down to being, this is what you have to do, when they may not have the facilities to do it, or they may not have the background knowledge or any of that. So the idea is to make it very flexible, but that also makes it very difficult because unlike math or science, our terminology isn't defined for us within the courses.
Right.
And so those language words are really difficult to make fit into the course in a way that teachers have to figure that out sometimes on their own.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, from what you're saying, what's one upside is that you are teaching a CTF course that, as your teacher, will play to your strengths in some way.
For sure.
But I guess the downside then, which is the question about how to incorporate reading into that, if this is something that's like my hobby or something that I'm like pretty good at it, I probably don't read about it, or have readings.
Well, you may have read about it, but it becomes second nature. Mm-hmm. It also becomes really difficult for us as CTF teachers to sometimes remember that this word may be confusing. It may be very confusing for a student because they don't know the definition. So one thing as a CTF teacher you need to do is take a look, if it's an area you know well, is what do these words mean and how to describe them as being different than similar words within the area.
Right. So, and then that's easy to do if you can fall back on what it means in your core area, but that doesn't mean that I know how that word's being used in science or in math or in social studies, right?
And our words mean very different things in different areas.
Yeah.
We have jargon that's specific to the area that we're teaching and that the students are working in. Flipping, for example, can mean different things in different programs, and it means different things in math than it does in language arts.
Flipping pancake?
Yes, and for sure. And even in foods, it means something different there. Sometimes you need to be very specific about what it means in a particular program or technology area versus a general versus another area.
So, I mean, I guess instead of saying to like a CTF teacher, like, suddenly this thing that you're teaching, you have to incorporate reading. It's not really like that. It's not meant to be disruptive. It's kind of more like, what are those places that maybe your content area, I don't know how else to refer to it, your CTF area, relies on reading already. And I was thinking about like CTS, for example, or construction, people in shops, that in some cases, because the command of what's in a shop is so urgent, they will bypass reading altogether and go to symbols, right? Or in science, like with poison or flammable. There's also some places where it's literally dangerous for them.
It is. And so as part of doing reading within CTF, which might be like, well, I'm going to sit down with them and read over this passage. And that's not what I'm meaning. And that's not what we want. Mm-hmm. We want to have just-in-time reading. So what are they going to need to know? When are they going to need to know it? And what's the most important support? Now in CTS and CTF, we're not having students with oxidizers a lot of the time, but sometimes there could be specifics. So then we need to worry about that. And just because a student sees a safety symbol doesn't mean they understand how to utilize it there. Mm-hmm. A saw with the fact that a safety symbol of it being dangerous doesn't mean how do I put my fingers in not to be dangerous, because we still have to utilize it.
Yeah.
And so those symbols, we use red and painting areas for hands not to go in. but we also use red as areas to aim sometimes.
Sure.
So we have to make sure about that.
Yeah. So I guess it's just like being explicit with kids, like not assuming that they know what they mean,
Oh, yeah.
right? And neither going so far that you're designing a whole lesson around a stop sign, but just kind of, saying out loud, like, this says this means that, and
Yeah.
this is the behavior that must come from that.
And in certain cases, you may take a project that you're needing the reading for, but you adapt that project so you're not just stuck with everybody's doing the same project. You may make part of your project where you have the student go and look up certain terms, does some work with them, looks up off of web pages, off of resources that you have, and that to develop that language to tell you that they understand aspects of it. You're not going to have them do this for days upon days, because then they're going to get bored and not be actually doing what you want.
Right.
But you can incorporate along the way. That may be even something that you can use under UDL to have all your students. Within foods, the idea of stirring or mixing is quite commonly used. So we have some example words: stirring, beating, blending, binding, creaming, whipping, and folding.
I was going to say, you're going to say fold in the cheese.
Yeah. And creaming, the idea of creaming butter and sugar together, students that have never dealt with creaming they go, there's no cream in the list. They don't know that, but it's a term for mixing.
Yeah.
And it's different than mix. It's different.
Yeah, so the opportunities are there.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I guess it's about kind of setting up your classroom routine or setting up your lessons in a way where it's not too much like work for you as the teacher.
But the idea that we have communication built within that area, we have the ability to communicate between people, to understand, we have the ability to create presentations, to create products. So all that incorporates the reading and writing. And in CTF, they don't have to hit all 14 in the same course. They don't have to. The teachers get to choose 3 or 4. So they don't have to redesign their course.
No.
But the other aspect is, take a shot. If it doesn't work, ask your students, where do you need the help? Where don't you?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So like those 14 things that teachers don't have to access them all the time, do all students have to access the same ones?
No.
Because like what the screener's doing is identifying those kids who struggle with reading. So let's go back to the creaming example, right? You will know from the online dashboard, or your principal will let you know like who it is in your groups that struggle the most with reading. Then that is the kid who does need to sit down and like look at the word cream and then understand that the ing at the end of cream makes creaming, which is a verb.
Yeah.
Cream is not what we're calling for, though. How does that make sense? And so this could be like a little thing that you pull aside those readers who do need that reinforcement. It doesn't have to be for everyone, but like you said, UDL wise, it could be, because there might be another student in that class who reads okay but doesn't cook with cream at home or butter, right?
Or doesn't know that. And so I'm a big believer in CTF about doing mini lessons. I want to pull you in, do a discussion with you, teach this to you in just a few minutes, go over it, make sure that group of 5 or 6 have it well, and then go ahead.
Yeah, and what I would say is wherever you're doing that lesson, have something to write on nearby so that the kids can see the word that you're talking about. Because really it's just reinforcing over and over again letters, the sounds the letters make, the sounds they make together, and the meaning that's connected.
And I've even had them where they jot down their information and put it down.
Like a notebook or a journal.
A notebook or a journal. For them to put in, if they want to, into a running Word document or whatever with Chromebooks. I'm a big believer in having a few Chromebooks in every one of the CTF courses, so students can go use them as they need to.
Right.
So it's not just the student that has troubles reading that's going to be accessing that Chromebook. It's all the students have access to it. They're going to grab it when they need to, and they can look up, ask, look for visuals of it, see videos of it. Because if you look up creaming butter and sugar, you can actually get a video of it that will help, and then jot down what their interpretation is of it.
So you have that reinforcement.
You have that reinforcement.
Yeah. I think it's too that sometimes when we're providing those scaffolds for kids, we're letting them kind of accomplish the outcome, but because we're not exposing them to written language, we're not giving them the repetition that they need. So it's just about finding ways to do both.
And that's entirely, ultimately we need them to be able to read and write so that we don't have to keep scaffolding.
Well, right, independence.
That over long term. So one thing I've gotten from a lot of individuals is, no, I understand. Do you understand? Yes.
Of course.
Are you sure you understand? Yes.
Well, they just want
Are you just telling me yes? Yes.
Oh, kids find ways to evade.
Yeah. Well, and it's coping mechanisms, and they've got a lot going on, and as a teacher, you don't have to be perfect.
No.
You're just starting off.
Yeah.
And them giving you feedback and you learning from it also shows them what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So how do they get better? How are you getting better?
I mean, it's a small thing, I think, but it is an additional thing to say, like, let's say I know that at one school I was at, they would do like a crochet CTF kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Like crochet, like just put the word crochet on the board. We have to do something for those kids in our classrooms that are coded red in that dashboard that are having difficulty reading. They need exposure to just letters. And I think it's kind of reassuring, right? That even in a course that you might not typically associate with like literacy or reading instruction, that you still can be part of helping that kid improve over the year.
Well, and the more exposure to anything, the better the person's going to get at it. I fully agree with that. So the writing up on the board, having word walls up about it. CTF, I don't see as many word walls. You can put that, and then it also gives the student, when they're stuck for a word, they can look at it and it's making those connections at the same time.
Yep.
And you'd be amazed if you watch your students, how many students, when you have a word wall up, will say the word and look at it at the same time.
That's orthographic mapping.
Yeah.
It's literally them putting that word into the neurons of their brain.
So,
is there anything you think like a teacher can kind of let go of in a CTF aspect or move on from in favor of bringing in more words? Because time is always an issue. Right?
Time's always an issue. The aspect of that everybody has to be doing everything at the same time in the same way.
I've always been envious of CTS teachers like about that you can have all these kids doing things, but it does demand an independence of them.
It does. Just because a student can't read and write doesn't mean they don't have strengths and areas.
Of course, yeah.
And so we often get stuck on that first part. We want to see those strengths, but we want to build upon that at the same time. We have students evaluate themselves and how they did. So part of your evaluation for some of those students may be, what words did you learn? What are their meanings now? How did you learn to incorporate them? What recipes would you incorporate this? What is the terminology that fits for this, or the method, or where does this go?
I like that, yeah.
It's making those connections to stuff they already know.
It kind of occurs to me though that like the walls are closing in around these students who maybe in their core subjects are like, not enjoying the reading and writing because it's difficult for them. And they might kind of look forward to a CTF course because they can finally get away from it. And now we're telling the CTF teachers like, chase them with the alphabet, like you can't get away.
But we're not. I don't want to make it a big portion about it, and I want to do it for stuff that was meaningful learning that they needed to do anyway.
They need to read, like that's.
But they need to do those terms or that aspect, and so then it's getting them. You've learned it. Give me a brief. I'm not asking for a paragraph on each one. I'm asking for a brief knowledge to show me that you've learned. And the key words may be what they then describe to me verbally.
Yeah. Tell me what creaming is again.
Yeah. And so they may put down. They may be put down. Yeah. They may be put down a few for a few terms rather than writing out a full sentence or a full paragraph. A few terms that reminds them of what they want to do. So we're getting some written there, but we're also taking the pressure off.
Yeah.
And just keeping it in mind and being flexible. And sometimes we get stuck on that. This is what my assignment is.
Yeah.
This is what I want.
This is the product.
Yeah. But I do let my students jot down some words in their own language to help them with the idea and working through it, because just thinking in another language is really tough.
Oh, absolutely.
I taught for 6 months in Mexico, and I taught in English, but everything else was in Spanish. And I'm not the best at learning languages. I tried, but it helped that when I was immersed. But I went for a day across the border. We traveled as a group of us, went across the border into Texas. And while Spanish was prevalent there, everything was in English. And we realized how much we had been thinking and working to constantly be in Spanish during our days.
It's exhausting.
It is, because our brain had to do a think, a process, a translate, and back again, where it would be normally 1 or 2 steps.
Yeah, and plus the risk of being wrong. Like right, when you're in your own language, there's just like an ease, right, that you can kind of work with. And Yeah, that's huge. I think that's ongoing. Like, so for those students who are learning like English as an additional language, right? Like that's always gonna be part of it because they're gonna have defaults, and like back to like the orthographic mapping, they already have like sounds mapped to graphs, mapped to like, you know, meaning in one language already. So it's like we're not trying to say to a student you can't access that anymore.
No.
Right? We're just trying to build new pathways in English, and then for some students who just only speak English but still struggle with reading, reinforce the pathways that are there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of bring up?
No, just making sure the safety aspect we talked about. Just be adaptable to what works with your students.
Yeah, and just like little things here and there, right? Just
and grow. Take what you've done, do that first step. A couple weeks later, do the next one. A couple weeks later, do the next one. And I know it's a lot of work, but as you get used to it, it'll be easier the next go around, and you'll have more tools.
Yeah.
And we are expecting our students to do that work too.
Well, we are, and like we know that there have always been struggling readers in our classrooms, and we know that there will continue to be growing numbers for the next few years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like start now, and then in 3 years, when the wave is really cresting, you'll be good at it.
Yeah, we'll have more experience. You'll have you'll have more ways to play with your tools. And okay.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking the time, and thank you for listening if you're still there. And yeah, give us any feedback or any kind of questions. We're here to answer this.
Yeah.
And
if you want specifics about how to incorporate into your class, just ask. That's my job.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.